Section 5 of The Life of Samuel Johnson, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Gesine. The Life of Samuel Johnson, Volume 1, by James Boswell. Section 5. He very early began to attempt keeping notes or memorandums by way of a diary of his life. I find in a parcel of loose leaves the following spirited resolution to contend against his natural indolence. October 1729. Desidie valedixi, serenis istius cantibus sodam post hac aurem obverserus. I bid farewell to sloth, being resolved henceforth not to listen to her siren strains. I have also in my possession a few leaves of another libellus, or little book, entitled Annals, in which some of the early particulars of his history are registered in Latin. I do not find that he formed any close intimacies with his fellow collegians, but Dr. Adams told me that he contracted a love and regard for Pembroke College, which he retained to the last. A short time before his death he sent to that college a present of all his works, to be deposited in their library, and he had thoughts of leaving to it his house at Lichfield, but his friends who were about him very properly dissuaded him from it, and he bequeathed it to some poor relations. He took a pleasure in boasting of the many eminent men who had been educated at Pembroke. In this list I found the names of Mr. Hawkins, the poetry professor, Mr. Shenstone, Sir William Blackstone, and others, not forgetting the celebrated popular preacher, Mr. George Whitefield, of whom, though Dr. Johnson did not think very highly, it must be acknowledged that his eloquence was powerful, his views pious and charitable, his assiduity almost incredible, and that since his death the integrity of his character has been fully vindicated. Being himself a poet, Johnson was peculiarly happy in mentioning how many of the sons of Pembroke were poets, adding with a smile of sportive triumph, "Sir, we are a nest of singing birds." He was not, however, blind to what he thought the defects of his own college, and I have, from the information of Dr. Taylor, a very strong instance of that rigid honesty which he ever inflexibly preserved. Taylor had obtained his father's consent to be entered of Pembroke, that he might be with his schoolfellow Johnson, with whom, though some years older than himself, he was very intimate. This would have been a great comfort to Johnson, but he fairly told Taylor that he could not, in conscience, suffer him to enter where he knew he could not have an able tutor. He then made inquiry all round the university, and having found that Mr. Bateman, of Christ Church, was the tutor of highest reputation, Taylor was entered of that college. Mr. Bateman's lectures were so excellent that Johnson used to come and get them at second hand from Taylor, till his poverty being so extreme that his shoes were worn out, and his feet appeared through them, he saw that this humiliating circumstance was perceived by the Christ Church men, and he came no more. He was too proud to accept of money, and somebody having set a pair of new shoes at his door, he threw them away with indignation. How must we feel when we read such an anecdote of Samuel Johnson? His spirited refusal of an eleemosynary supply of shoes arose, no doubt, from a proper pride. But considering his ascetic disposition at times, as acknowledged by himself in his Meditations, and the exaggeration with which some have treated the peculiarities of his character, I should not wonder to hear it ascribed to a principle of superstitious mortification, as we are told by Tertullinus, in his Life of St. Ignatius Loyola, that this intrepid founder of the order of Jesuits, when he arrived at Goa, after having made a severe pilgrimage through the eastern deserts, persisted in wearing his miserable shattered shoes, and when new ones were offered him, rejected them as an unsuitable indulgence. The res angusta domi prevented him from having the advantage of a complete academical education. The friend to whom he had trusted for support had deceived him. His debts in college, though not great, were increasing, and his scanty remittances from Lichfield, which had all along been made with great difficulty, could be supplied no longer, his father having fallen into a state of insolvency. Compelled, therefore, by irresistible necessity, he left the college in autumn 1731, without a degree, having been a member of it little more than 3 years. Dr. Adams, the worthy and respectable master of Pembroke College, has generally had the reputation of being Johnson's tutor. The fact, however, is that in 1731 Mr. Jordan quitted the college, and his pupils were transferred to Dr. Adams, so that had Johnson returned, Dr. Adams would have been his tutor. It is to be wished that this connection had taken place. His equal temper, mild disposition, and politeness of manners might have insensibly softened the harshness of Johnson, and infused into him those more delicate charities, those petites morales, in which, it must be confessed, our great moralist was more deficient than his best friends could fully justify. Dr. Adams paid Johnson this high compliment. He said to me at Oxford in 1776, "I was his nominal tutor, but he was above my mark." When I repeated it to Johnson, his eyes flashed with grateful satisfaction, and he exclaimed, "That was liberal and noble." And now, I had almost said poor, Samuel Johnson returned to his native city, destitute, and not knowing he should gain even a decent livelihood. His father's misfortunes in trade rendered him unable to support his son, and for some time there appeared no means by which he could maintain himself. In the December of this year his father died. The state of poverty in which he died appears from a note in one of Johnson's little diaries of the following year, which strongly displays his spirit and virtuous dignity of mind. 1732, Julii 15. Undecim aureus deposui, quodie quicquid ante matris funus, quod serum sit precor, de paternis bonis sperare licet, vigenti scilicet libras accepi. Usque adeo mihi fortuna fingenda est. Interea ne papatate, veris animi languescant, ne in flagellia egestas abigat cavendum. I laid by 11 guineas on this day, when I received £20, being all that I have reason to hope for out of my father's effects, previous to the death of my mother, an event which I pray God may be very remote. I now therefore see that I must make my own fortune. Meanwhile, let me take care that the powers of my mind may not be debilitated by poverty, and that indigence do not force me into any criminal act. Johnson was so far fortunate that the respectable character of his parents and his own merit had from his earliest years secured him a kind reception in the best families at Lichfield. Among these I can mention Mr. Howard, Mr. Swinfen, Mr. Simpson, Mr. Levitt, Captain Garrick, father of the great ornament of the British stage, but above all Mr. Gilbert Walmsley, Register of the Prerogative Court of Lichfield, whose character, long after his decease, Dr. Johnson has, in his Life of Edmund Smith, thus drawn in the glowing colours of gratitude. Of Gilbert Walmsley, thus presented to my mind, let me indulge myself in the remembrance. I knew him very early. He was one of the first friends that literature procured me,